by leave, I move on behalf of the leader, the motion standing in the leader's name.
Leader Saw, is leave granted?
Yes.
Leave.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. So I move, in terms of the motion, that this House A, recognises that payroll tax discourages business growth and employment, B, calls on the Malinauskas Labor Government to lift the payroll tax threshold from $1.5 million to $2.1 million in the 26-27 budget. C, calls on the Malinauskas Labor Government to exempt apprentices and trainees from payroll tax. And D, notes that South Australia has the lowest business confidence in the nation, according to the NAB monthly business survey. Now, Deputy Speaker, start with the facts, and I think these remain uncontroversial, despite some kind of flipping and flopping from the government in recent times. First, payroll tax is effectively a tax on jobs. Secondly, it discourages business from growing, hiring, and increasing wages. Thirdly, let's be clear, SA's current payroll tax threshold is at $1.5 million. The full payroll tax rate of 4.9% applies above $1.7 million, and our proposal, the Liberal opposition's proposal, which has been made clear for some time, but let me shout it out loudly and clearly again in this chamber, is to lift that threshold to $2.1 million. So that's a $600,000 increase in the threshold, or 40% increase in the threshold. There's a reason for it, and it's real, and I'll cite a couple of examples in a moment. Small and family business, and we are increasingly talking about small and family business, need relief. They don't need a barrier to growth that remains in their way. Now, we've seen that data, and there's now multiple sources of it. The motion refers to the NAB monthly business survey that tells us that business confidence has fallen sharply. We know also that, according to the SA Business Chamber, that business confidence in South Australia has now fallen to its lowest level since the pandemic. And I'll come back to the passing of time in this regard, because we have to go back to 2019 to see any change in the threshold. And that's all happened in circumstances where freight and supply chain concerns have surged sharply. Those have been driven by rising costs and the instability linked to the present conflict in the Middle East. So, business is presently caught at the moment in a particularly intense way, caught between absorbing rising costs or passing them on to customers. And we know in the cost of living crisis that we're all enduring, that those customers are already under extraordinary pressure themselves. And so, businesses, it's not only tax, but we see business facing higher and higher costs across the board: fuel, electricity, rent, wages, and input costs. I mentioned, citing a couple of examples. Chefs on Wheels is a practical example. It had to abandon interstate expansion because of those costs, particularly fuel, electricity, and taxes, that knocked margins to such a small margin they had to abandon their expansion plans, and they've reported family members working extraordinary long hours just to keep the business afloat. In recent days, Deputy Speaker, we've heard from Daniel Milkey, who's the owner of Mascarado at Norwood, and he has said, and I'll quote him here, he said, "We'll have to sell a few businesses or shut them down if we can't sell them, if there's anyone to buy them, so we can get out of a payroll tax threshold, so we can save that money." So that just seems, that just means that there's less people employed. And Daniel goes on to say that payroll tax is a tax on employing people. So we want to employ more people, we get penalised if we employ more people. So what's the incentive to keep employing? And I couldn't put it any better. And so as I said at the outset, it seems that we have this uncontroversial fact that payroll tax is a bad thing. And as Daniel Milkey said, you've got business out there looking to employ people, and Chefs on Wheels case making plans for expansion, and they just can't do that because payroll tax is getting in the way. Now, Deputy Speaker, I referred to the fact that we've had a kind of a bracket creep that's gone on in terms of payroll tax in this state. It's been now the better part of a decade since the threshold was changed. Happily, threshold was increased by the Marshall Liberal Government back in 2019, and since then we've seen these years and years of Malinauskas Labor inaction and resistance to change. And I think the message has just got to be clear, and I think the message is getting through to business in this state. Of course, the problem of inaction isn't simply a static one. We've seen wages and business costs that have risen significantly. And, we ought to look on wage growth as this really good thing. Excellent. People are in higher paying jobs. We've had wages increase. We've got to do more about business costs, but something squarely within both the responsibility and capacity of government is to say, right, well, over those years, we're not going to allow the creep to set in. We're going to do something about increasing the threshold, and yet we've seen nothing occur. And so, it's not as though Malinauskas Labor has come along and sort of made a case to say, there's just such gigantic profits being enjoyed by these employers, and they're out there, making huge amounts of money off the backs of their employed workforce, and so it's really not an issue. There's no case that's been made of that nature, and because the truth is that employers will look to be enterprising. They will look to seek opportunities for growth and expansion, but both in circumstances where costs of wages and costs of business operations generally have grown, they will look to government to say, come on, can you take away just some of that burden, and an agreed insidious anti-employment tax looks very much like it ought to be first cab off the rank. And that's why we maintain our calls ahead of the budget tomorrow, that we ought to be seeing significant movement up to $2.1 million as the what ought to be the new payroll tax threshold henceforth. Deputy Speaker, it's all laid out there, loud and clear. On this side of the House, the Liberal opposition has made plain the imperative: lift the payroll tax threshold from 1.5 million to 2 million, and do more and more practical work as well. Exempt apprentices and trainees from payroll tax. Incentivise business in that way. We all know that the capacity for a business to take on an apprentice and trainee is a considered and committed thing to do in the first place. So get into it by providing payroll tax relief specifically for apprentices and trainees in that way. And as I said, Deputy Speaker, this is with a view to taking an opportunity to not just sort of talk the talk as we've seen Malinauskas Labor is want to do about how pro-business it is, but actually be able to look small and family businesses square on and say, we're backing you by walking the walk. And tomorrow is that perfect opportunity. There should be no delay. Now, just to underscore and emphasise the opportunity that is within the control of the government to take tomorrow, let's just identify what's happened in terms of government revenue in this space, because payroll tax revenue has grown strongly. The government ought to be looking for an opportunity to do something about that. And let's look at taking responsibility. In 21-22, payroll tax revenue to the state government was $1.482 billion. In 24-25, it's estimated at $1.95 billion. That's an increase of $468 million, or 32% in 3 years. So it's not as though that's falling away either. We've got a crunch on small and family business. We've got a Malinauskas Labor Government that says that it wants to back them. Meanwhile, we see a clear, dramatic increase in the payroll tax take, and yet no countermeasure, at least articulated ahead of the budget. The opportunity is there tomorrow. Because if nothing's done, Deputy Speaker, we've got 25-26 payroll tax revenue budgeted at $2.048 billion, and by 28-29 that's forecast to reach $2.392 billion. So we take a moment to just take that in. It becomes a significant increase over the period of time that I've just been addressing. No shift in the threshold, and a dramatic increase in the tax take over that time. So government's taking hundreds of millions of dollars more from payroll tax, and some substantial part of that, at the very least, needs to flow back to business through relief. Deputy Speaker, I've talked about apprentices and trainees. It ought to go without saying that their work and the need for South Australia to have more skilled workers is imperative, and never more so than right now. We need more young people skilled and on the tools. We need every incentive for those leading the way to take them on. And that matters, of course, for housing, construction, defence, manufacturing and the trades. And so payroll tax needs to get out of the way. That is all about jobs, enterprise in this state, and the taking of opportunity. So it is very much over to the government, and all eyes will be on the Treasurer tomorrow to act.
Member for Hartley.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to oppose the motion, not because the issues raised are unimportant, but because the approach proposed fails to acknowledge that South Australia is already the lowest taxing state on the mainland and one of the most competitive places in the nation to live and do business. First and foremost, the best way a state government can support business is to provide a stable and predictable business environment. Because, Deputy Speaker, when businesses have certainty, they invest with confidence. When they invest, they grow, and when they grow, they create jobs for South Australians. Deputy Speaker, that is exactly what we have been doing. Since coming to office in 2022, the Malinauskas Labor Government has been focused on creating a business environment that encourages investment, supports opportunity, and drives economic growth, while at the same time removing unnecessary barriers that hold businesses back. We've been deliberate in our approach, lowering uncertainty, maintaining discipline, and ensuring that South Australia remains an attractive place to do business. The results speak for themselves. Today, a record number of South Australians are participating in our economy. Unemployment has reached historic lows, currently sitting at 4.2%, the equal second lowest in the nation. To put that into perspective, South Australia's unemployment rate has had a 3 in front of it just 16 times since monthly records began almost 48 years ago. And every one of those instances has occurred under the Malinauskas government. Since 2022, nearly 100,000 new jobs have been created. Alongside that, we have seen a net increase of more than 10,000 new businesses choosing to operate right here in South Australia. These are real jobs, real livelihoods, and real opportunities for South Australians and their families. And importantly, this progress is not just recognised by us, it's being acknowledged by independent economic commentators. ComSec's State and Territory Quarterly Perspective, released in March 2026, described South Australia as the standout performer for the December quarter. ANZ's latest Stateometer report, released in April, said South Australia leads the way, highlighting our state's standout performance and strongest above-trend economic activity in the nation, driven by significant increases in business and trade. And Westpac's Coast to Coast report, released in March, confirmed that South Australia has once again come first on growth for the second year in a row, noting that our state has hit something of a sweet spot in its economic performance. Deputy Speaker, these are powerful endorsements. They demonstrate that the policies we are pursuing are not only working, but they're also being recognized nationally. That's why during the 2026 state election, we sent a clear message to businesses. There would be no surprises, and we would not change the rules out from under them. Because stability matters, certainty matters, and businesses should be able to plan for the future without fear of sudden or unpredictable changes. In stark contrast, the opposition took a very different approach. Their strategy was one of short-term promises and costly commitments amounting to almost $6 billion in total. Included in that were measures such as $200 million to raise the payroll tax-free threshold from $1.5 million to $2.1 million, and $80 million to exempt apprentices and trainees from payroll tax. And now, at the first opportunity, they're calling on this government to deliver those same commitments despite the significant cost to the budget. But it doesn't stop there. Since the election, the opposition has continued to call for hundreds of millions of dollars in additional spending. In just 74 days, they've called for over $1.6 billion in spending, including $520 million to extend stamp duty exemption for first home buyers to existing homes, $350 million towards a $605 million Barossa hospital, $173 million in incentives for midwives, nurses, and general practitioners, $100 million for a fuel response package, $45.2 million for radiation therapy services in the Limestone Coast, $42 million for flashing orange lights at all new school zones, $38 million for free flu vaccinations, $30 million for free public transport for 3 months, $16.5 million for a Doppler weather radar, $12 million for the Port Lincoln Marina upgrade, $3 million for an Algal Bloom Royal Commission, $3 million towards the Cummins Police Station, and $1.5 million for a pedestrian crossing at Dulwich Village. Deputy Speaker, that's almost $22 million a day. This is not a responsible economic plan. This is not a sustainable approach to governing, and it's certainly not consistent with providing the stable conditions that businesses need. By contrast, our government understands that strong economic management requires balance. It requires discipline. It requires making decisions that support growth while ensuring we can continue to deliver essential services and infrastructure for our community. And importantly, it requires maintaining a competitive business environment. The Business Council of Australia, an independent commentator, has for the third consecutive year ranked South Australia as the overall best jurisdiction in the nation to do business in its Regulation Rumble 2025 report. We ranked #1 overall, including #1 for taxation and planning systems. This reflects the fact that South Australia already has one of the most competitive payroll tax regimes in the country. We have the second highest exemption threshold at $1.5 million in wages and one of the lowest standard tax rates at 4.95%. When surcharge levies applied in other jurisdictions are taken into account, South Australia has the lowest standard top payroll tax rate in the nation. So, Deputy Speaker, the facts are clear. South Australia is already one of the most competitive places in the nation to do business, which is why there are no plans to increase the payroll tax exemption threshold. We are proud to be the lowest taxing state on the mainland and a leading place to live, work, and invest. But strong economic conditions depend on more than tax cuts. They require sound financial management, strong services, and the right infrastructure. And that is exactly what this government is delivering. Thank you.
If the member speaks, he closes debate.
Speaker, well, we've heard, not for the first time, on the government benches, and it would appear that, you know, the Kool-Aid's being passed around, this clear statement by Malinauskas Labor that the extraordinary growing tax take on the payroll tax side is going to be somehow characterised as a virtue now, rather than what we've heard in the past, from the Premier at least, some acknowledged break on enterprise growth in this state. And so having laid out, and I was a bit conscious of having been a bit specific about how payroll tax takes have grown over the years, particularly since 2019, it'll be very interesting now to see the public debate, because now it's been made clear. I think we've got some sort of pretty precise kind of pre-budget release, courtesy of the member for Hartley's contribution just now. We're not going to see any tremendous response. It sounds like we're not going to see any sort of payroll tax relief in the budget, and judging by the sort of fulsome way in which the member for Hartley was backing the government's agenda in this state, I wouldn't be surprised if the budget surprises us by actually reducing the payroll tax threshold. It might bring it down, such as a virtue that we've heard sort of described over on the other side. But let's be in no mistake here. Let's be under no false impression. The payroll tax take over recent years and heading out over the next couple, if nothing's done about it, is going to be up in the region of an extra $1 billion. And so, you know, there's little wonder that a government that is kind of, you know, taking a view that money is better off in its hands than in the hands of small and family businesses in this state, will be, you know, singing the praises and sounding the virtues of what is increasingly to be characterised as a great big tax on South Australian businesses. We might have heard it first from the member for Hartley. Sounds like we're not going to be able to expect any relief. It might even be, by the sounds of it, getting worse for South Australians. But let's remember, no action on the payroll tax threshold amounts to the burden growing for small and family businesses in this state. That is a shameful set of circumstances. There needs to be action, and clearly only the Liberal Party in this state has set out the clear path for that relief. And so, with my thanks to the member for Hartley for contributing to the debate, I hope that my words of closure might have seen some sort of change of heart from members opposite. I note the initial inclination, but I wholeheartedly commend this motion to the House.